Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reddit Roast number 17. John and I are showing our dedication to you as viewers today. I am recording from London. My sister is getting married tomorrow, but I'm still doing Reddit Roast. John, I think you're on a boat, right?
I am on a boat.
John's on a boat. So let's dive into our roasts. Today we've got a funny set of profiles. We've got somebody who's pivoting out of consulting, right? We hear all the time of people trying to pivot into consulting. Well, today we've got someone pivoting out of consulting. We've got a photojournalist which is like got to be one of the most interesting extracurriculars we've heard of recently. And we're going to address the question that went viral on Reddit this week about whether the HBS MBA loses its shine after a few years in some sectors. Interesting. John, I can't wait to get stuck in. Let's go into profile number one, which Mal has titled, I Don't Care About My Job. It's nice. Okay, so hi everyone. I am wondering whether to apply for an MBA this fall. Right, John, profile overview. Work experience. This candidate has 4 years of work experience at a big four consultancy. GRE score of, I make that 328, 165 verbal, 163 quant. Undergrad GPA of 3.7, is a 26-year-old female Asian American. GRE is expiring this October. I want to get an MBA primarily for a career pivot, like I was saying before. I'm currently in a big four consulting, and I don't really care about making manager. I also don't care about consulting in general. So I wouldn't be pivoting to MBB. Rather, I'd be more interested in corporate strategy or marketing. Don't want to get into $200,000 of debt either for the MBA. So realistically, it says realistically, still quite ambitious, targeting M7, T10, and hopefully with some scholarship money. So current thinking is applying to 3 or 4 schools, maybe targeting T10, etc., seeing how it goes. Question is it worth the effort, John? Should I expand beyond T10 to try and get more scholarship money since my goal isn't IB or MBB? Interesting. John, do you want to start off with a high level profile overview? How are you seeing this profile?
Pretty solid profile overall, Sam. Pretty vanilla as well. I like those academic stats. You have a 328 GRE with a pretty strong split, a 3.7 GPA alongside that is solid territory for M7 and T10. Although I would argue that OP is an ORM given the Asian American demographic, which we can dive into just a little bit. Um, Professionally, look, Big Four consulting is pretty standard. The career pivot makes sense. Lots of folks like to um, pivot away from Big Four consulting, whether it is to MBB consulting or outside the industry. The question is whether or not, this happens in the short term or the long term. I would say, that's a pretty strong professional profile for those schools as well. Demographically, Asian American female in Deloitte, you're going to have a whole lot of competition there. But the profile is readily understood by the AdCom, so it will come down to the pool. Over to you, Sam.
Yeah, I quite like that goal. I like it. I mean, we see and schools see a lot of people who are in consulting and looking to pivot, from Deloitte to a McKinsey, for example. And they see that so often that actually I think it's quite refreshing to have someone who's like, I've built my skill set within consulting. I've got my consulting toolkit. Done with this. I want to go and do something in the in the real world, so to speak, or in industry. Now, what I like from an admissions consulting perspective, and as I'm starting to think about what this narrative looks like, is somebody who is you could make the case quite nicely in your application essays that you've got a broad experience right now. And that's because that's one thing that these consultants firms give you, big four consultants firms give you, is broad experience, lots of different clients, lots of engagements, etc. And now I want to focus on something that I really care about, right? Whether that's something that aligns with my extracurriculars, whether that's something that aligns with like my favorite engagement.
Mhm.
That story is a really nice story from an application standpoint. It's a really kind of intuitive and logical thing for a reader to be like, oh, you were on a project that you really liked and now you want to do that full time. I get that. or
Hmm.
you've been built up this skill set and you want to focus on a particular sector which you find interesting because of your extracurriculars. That also makes sense. So I'm actually really quite excited by this goal. I quite like that, and it's something that certainly from an admissions consultant perspective, like it's a dream, I think, for us to work with and for us to be able to extract that narrative. I really like that. John, let's talk about scholarships. There's this question here. I don't want to get into 200K of debt, like a lot of people, and realistically aiming for sort of M7 T10, but is really focused on significant scholarship money. Now, let me start with an anecdote on this, which is sort of broadly my advice, and I think, John, you would echo this, is if your scholarship's your focus, you're going to have to lower your expectations in terms of school rank a little bit, right? What classically happens is you apply to safeties, mediums, and reach schools, and maybe you get an admit from your kind of medium reach end, hopefully. But what class typically happens is your safeties, you get your admit, and you also get some scholarship money. So aligning with this story, I had a classic example of this last year. Client who was targeting kind of T10 M7s. We also rolled USC Marshall into the mix. Big Four consulting client, just like OP, in fact, quite similar background in lots of ways, who received a $90,000 scholarship from USC Marshall. Now, that was slightly lower on her ranking list, on her priority list. But when you've got a $90,000 scholarship, you've got something to think about. So that's typically how OP, I think, should be thinking about this. Do you think 3 or 4 schools is enough given that plan?
No, I think OP should apply to more schools, Sam, based on your thinking, which I am completely aligned with, to be able to widen the network, the array of schools that OP can potentially get scholarships for, and use that to negotiate it down the line.
That's it, right? If you've got a quite overrepresented profile in lots of ways, and I say that from a Big Four consulting, like they see a lot of these profiles, and you're really focused on scholarships, and you're not dead set on top ranked schools if the good scholarship comes in. This is a classic case of apply to as many schools as you can reasonably do, and as many schools as your recommenders can reasonably do. What, 6, 7 schools?
Yeah, that's a good target for at least one round, and then evaluate whether you want to apply to a couple more in the next round. But 6 to 7 schools, Sam, is something that I would recommend to my clients as well.
Good. Now we're talking as we speak. It is Friday the 13th of June, so we've got applications. Yeah, 3 months until the September deadlines. So there's really no reason to not be able to do 6 applications. Like, okay, if we were in August and we were crunching, coming up to the deadlines, I would get it. Like, okay, maybe narrow it down. But you've got 3 months. You should be
Hmm.
able to do 6 schools, right? With an application, with an admissions consultant, especially, you should be able to crank out those schools. No big deal. And if you guide your recommenders in a constructive and clear way, they should be able to do 6 schools too. Okay, good. So the other thing that I wanted to mention, John, on this profile, last thing was in terms of spreading them out. So let's say it is 6 schools. Let's say OP can find the time to do 6 schools and is focused on scholarships especially. How would you spread them out in terms of, like, I don't know, M7, T10, like which schools would OP be applying for?
I would always think about applying to the more competitive schools in the first round. So I would say M7 schools in round one, maybe a T10 school or two in round one. But if round one schools are successful, you get waitlisted, you apply, then that's your cue to apply to more schools in round two. But you shouldn't always just assume that you would get into those schools in round one. I would prepare a robust application that would potentially tie OP over to those other schools. That means doing the research and so forth. But I think net applying to more competitive schools in round one is probably the right intuition here.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to be a bit more conservative on this, to slightly different strategy, and push for a couple of reach schools. Fine.
Yep.
but also the mids and the safeties. And I think you want to get all of those offers across the range, all of those applications across the range submitted at the same time, because I think OP should be negotiating scholarships. So if OP gets an admit from a lower ranked school with a scholarship and a higher ranked school with no scholarship, having all of those offers at the same time, OP can negotiate scholarships. That might be quite valuable.
I can see that case. I would say yes if OP has the bandwidth to apply to all the schools.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, I I think there's a balance here, Sam, between finding avenues to finding opportunities to get into schools, for sure, and also making sure you're maximizing your chances for some of your target schools. But I am aligned with you in that OP should apply to at least a couple safety schools in round one, just to be able to get if scholarship is a main target of theirs.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, good stuff. Look, I think we've covered everything on that profile. So let's move on to the next one. OP, really solid profile there. And I think one, given the number of schools you want to apply to and the fact that you're quite overrepresented, a good case for an admissions consultant. If we can help, get in touch. Okay, let's move on to profile number two. Now, John, we have an EMBA candidate now. Uh, Thinking about an EMBA, what would you do if you were me? Software engineer, 17 years of work experience. That's very wise compared to the profiles we're often roasting. And I will just highlight the sort of just straight from the get-go, EMBA, 17 years of work experience. I have the Booth, Chicago Booth profile, FAQs open here. The EMBA has an average of 13 years of work experience. So again, on the top end of the work experience, even for an EMBA, but definitely kind of in the right in the targeting the right programs. Worked at a startup for 7 years, Fortune 200 companies for 3 years, mid-sized firm for 5 years. So quite a range of experience here. 2 to 3 years ago, left my full-time role to co-found a SaaS company. Started generating about 100K in monthly recurring revenue. Very nice. Hold a master's in computer science with a 3.67. Now that's a master's GPA. We don't know about undergrad. I'm based in the tri-state area. If I pursue an EMBA, my focus would be on Wharton, Columbia, or Stern. Classic top US East Coast MBA programs. A few questions. Having successfully launched a startup, I now feel drawn to building something solo. So going from the kind of co-founder to the founder route, would an MBA in entrepreneurship help refine my approach, streamline business strategies, and strengthen my credentials for future ventures? I'm not interested in taking the GMAT GRE. I feel too occupied. I've seen Wharton and Columbia selectively offer GMAT waivers. I'd like to hear from those who've successfully obtained one. Okay, interesting. While our business started a few years ago generating revenue, personal savings are depleted. I've also read that Stern and Columbia offer scholarships and for some candidates. Okay, what qualifies? Resume lacks brand name recognition. I attended a non-prestigious university, eager to add a high caliber profile institution to my profile, but is it worth it for the sake of validation and prestige? Over time, my closest friends have moved on, and I'm hoping to build a network of like-minded individuals. Will the EMBA help with that? A lot of questions there, John. Let's start with the profile evaluation. I know it's an EMBA profile, but let's broadly just cover how do you see this profile?
Yeah, pretty interesting profile, Sam. I do like elements of OP's profile here. Academically, look, there's no undergrad GPA given, but a 3.67 in comp sci is pretty meaningful. OP did say a no name brand here, so that's something to consider. No test score. Look, OP says, Columbia, Wharton, and NYU Stern offer test waivers. I'm a little bit leery about that. The last I heard, and we can definitely look into this, is that Wharton does not offer a test waiver. Columbia does, and NYU Stern does not require a test for EMBA admission. So look into that. I think that even then, I think having a solid EA will help bolster OP's profile, especially if the schools you graduated from are not name brand or meaningful. Professionally, look, 17 years of experience is pretty meaningful. Looks like OP's background is in software engineering, but it's great that they were able to take on this CTO position that will focus on leadership and impact, not necessarily being tied to the individual contributor halo of being a software engineer. Look, and the other thing is that, OP says, not a name brand, but a Fortune 200 is a somewhat meaningful one, even if it's not a FANG one. And then demographically, definitely in the right range for an EMBA here. Not much else to go off on, but I think there are some elements here that are meaningful for these schools, Sam. So over to you.
John, I'm going to be a bit mean on this one, a bit rude. Okay, here we go. OP, not interested in taking the GMAT or the GRE. Okay, like everybody else is like interested in the GMAT. No one's interested in the GMAT. No one's interested in the GRE. We take it because we have to. We take it because we have to. I don't care if you're not interested and you're busy. Everyone's busy. Get on with it. Two, you want you want a scholarship. You're going to get a Wharton or Columbia without a GRE because you're not interested in taking a GRE, and you want a scholarship. Really? Come on. Like, I think this is, for me, this screams a bit demanding, a bit entitled, a little bit. I'm very, very wary about this. Am I being too harsh?
Well, I think maybe it's the tone in which OP has conveyed this. No one is interested in taking the GMAT or the GRE, Sam. And I do know a few people who are actually. These test hounds. But yeah, OP should suck it up and take the. I suspect it could be a fun experience for those who are just thinking of upskilling themselves. Hey, look, I mean, I on occasion find myself gravitating over to the ETS and GMAT website, Sam, just to see what's up.
If okay, seriously, if OP wants to take it, like OP wants to minimize test load, but still wants to get into Wharton with a scholarship, I'd focus on the executive assessment. Would
Oh,
be
for sure.
right. That's the first thing, right? Anyone, OP executive assessment is like kind of half the length of the GMAT. Typically, we've seen people do both, and a lot of people score a lot better on the EA in terms of percentiles. So that's your kind of your middle ground, right? That's your compromise. Okay, you're not going to go and do the GMAT because it is a ton of work, but the EA, it's not quite so much work, but it'll still give you a score, and you don't need to start asking them about waivers, which is frankly not a good look. You can give them a score. You're not going to score badly in the EA. Seriously, you're clearly a smart guy. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna score okay or well in the EA. It's gonna suck, but you're gonna do it for a few weeks, and then you can apply without that concern. And then with a strong EA score and this background, I think scholarships potentially are a possibility here. I think it might come down to negotiations. We've talked about this before. You're clearly open to a bunch of schools, Wharton, Columbia, Stern. Don't sound particularly married to any of those schools. So, apply to all three of them, and maybe there's a conversation about scholarships. You can, just like for MBA programs, negotiate scholarships for EMBAs. So that would be my approach. What am I forgetting, John?
No, I think you're right. You're right on the money here, Sam. No pun intended. I think, look, yes, I mean it is generally harder to get scholarships from EMBA programs. It is possible for sure, but if you were to compare if you go to compare generosity of EMBA programs to MBA programs, definitely a little bit tighter. Um, the purse strings are a little bit tighter there. So all the more reason for OP to get a higher test score at minimum in EA to be able to to give schools something to latch on to. Let's put it that way.
So for those that don't know, I went to Oxford and did my MBA there. Oxford's EMBA program is also one of the top rated university EMBAs. And one of the things that I heard while I was on the program, and this stays between us, is the EMBA is treated a little bit like the cash cow for the business school.
Mhm.
Right? They're bloody expensive. Right? EMBA programs are really expensive. A lot of people are sponsored, and so companies are paying for it. It defies the point to have an EMBA program and then give people massive scholarships. It's not really what it's about. You can expect, low five figures is sort of a classic scholarship number. The European programs, typically 20, 30K scholarships is kind of quite classic, but you're not going to be getting a full ride. You're going to be expected to cough up, or your employer is going to be expected to cough up.
Hmm.
And if that really matters to you, then like we've said, EA is the approach. Okay, so John, just quickly going through these, summarizing these questions. Would an MBA in entrepreneurship help? I think it's fair to say an MBA would help somebody who's looking to become a serial entrepreneur,
Hmm.
particularly fill those skill gaps. You've
Yep.
obviously got expertise in certain areas. I believe you're CTO, if I remember correctly. Yeah, CTO, but you might not have had accounting training, for example. So the MBA will fill those gaps. That's great. We've talked about the GMAT, the GRE, take the EA. We've talked about the scholarships. Again, take the EA and negotiate. Brand recognition, yes, Wharton will give you that. Finally, the friends. Look, all I can say from my experience on an MBA, I've not done an EMBA, but from an MBA perspective, I'm still in touch with lots of the people I was with on that program. John, I think you're the same. That friend group will stay with me, I hope, for the rest of my life. So yes, if you're looking to build meaningful connections, as long as you put yourself out there,
Hmm.
right? Don't lock yourself in the library. Don't disappear off campus as soon as possible. As long as you put yourself out there, I think you can make like-minded friends. It's fair, John?
I mean, I agree that there are friend groups to be had for people who lock themselves in the library, Sam. But yes.
Sure. I wasn't one of them, but okay.
Me neither.
Okay, awesome. Let's move over to the next profile then. So this we have an MBB consultant and a pro bono founder. So this is a really, really interesting profile. The classic profile that is punching for the top schools. Let's see whether OP has what it takes. So, background long-term goal is to drive sustainability and social impact in Southeast Asia through consulting. Here's my background: 24-year-old male, Southeast Asian American US citizen. So, I think we can read that as Indian American, right, John?
I would say South Asian, Indian American. Southeast Asian could mean Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia.
Okay, understood. Undergrad, US Public University, Business Administration double major, 3.71 GPA. GRE 323, decent, yeah, more quant leaning than verbal. Not planning to retake. Languages, two. MBA sponsorship secured. So that's classic of MBA, of MBB, McKinsey, Bain, BCG. Typically, they will sponsor their applicants, their staff to go and do an MBA for a couple of years on condition that they come back for a couple of years as well. So it looks like OP has secured sponsorship. That's great. Work experience: 3 years at MBB, recently promoted to senior associate. Founded a pro bono consulting org in college, still running 4 years later. Focused on social impact in Southeast Asia, served 35 clients, including local governments, non-profits, and development agencies. That's really nice. Post MBA goals: return to MBB, obviously because sponsored. Long term, move to Southeast Asia, become a partner focused on sustainability and public private impact work. Target schools: Wharton, MIT, Booth, Columbia, Yale. Additional context: grew up on a small island in Southeast Asia. There might be an interesting origin story there. Essays will highlight deep regional ties. Okay, recommendations expected to be solid but not standout. Questions: one, do I have a realistic shot at Wharton and the other M7s? Should I retake the GRE? Three, any other schools I should consider adding or swapping? Okay, thanks for all the detail, OP. John, how do you see this profile from a high level?
I like this profile overall, Sam. I have a couple choice words to say about academics. I'll start with that.
Okay.
3.71, definitely within range for M7. That 323 gives me a little bit of pause. While it is within range for some of those M7 schools, it's on the lower end of the range. And if OP asks, should I retake? Absolutely, you should consider retaking. That 164 quant is not bad. But overall, you're going to have to edge those to edge that to at least a mid 320s plus to be competitive from your academic angle. Professionally, MBB is solid with one promotion already, a little on the younger side, but that promotion definitely would help show maturity, leadership, and expertise at their job. Sponsorship is a big plus. We can talk a little bit about why that is the case later, Sam. Demographically, just mentioned younger side for being a 24-year-old. The bigger problem, though, is that OP will be benchmarked against the MBB pool, especially for those M7 schools. With a 323 and OK recommendations, I fear that OP would be cast aside relative to the other MBB applicants. Again, MBB by itself is a big plus, but we have to think about how OP stands out among the MBB pool. Extracurriculars, pretty solid. You have a pro bono in consulting and plays into the story. So overall, I do like this profile, Sam. There are a couple of ways that we can things to talk about, but over to you for now.
Yeah, okay. So can you tell us more about OP sponsored by McKinsey? Can you or Bain or BCG? Can you explain why schools like that?
Because that guarantees employment after you graduate from the MBA program, and that's what helps drive rankings. And plus, the MBB salary is high, and a high salary would help prop up your average MBA salary, which also factors into rankings as well.
And because it's paid for by McKinsey, Bain, or BCG, the school doesn't have to give you scholarships. So they
Yes.
can keep that money and give it to people who, to attract candidates to their program. So what's interesting to me, John, is I just want to build on what you're saying there. MBB applicants typically have higher GMAT, GRE
Mhm.
scores. We know from experience that an applicant applying to an HSW in particular from McKinsey Bain BCG, you would be expected to have, I think, even higher than what you were saying. I think 328 is kind of the soft floor for the
Yeah.
GRE score with a decent balance. 323 is quite a way off.
And that's tough, Sam, because OP is a US citizen, obviously from Southeast Asia. And so, if OP were applying from Southeast Asia or applying from a place where English isn't the first or native language, then you can sort of couch yourself with an optional essay about that. But even then, you are competing against other people from these regions with high GRE scores, often in that soft cutoff that you mentioned.
Yeah. What about recommenders? John, OP's mentioned this line, which is quite interesting, about recommendations are expected to be solid, though not stand out. What do you think OP can do to try and ensure that the LOR is more than solid?
Working closely with the recommender to make sure that what they submit shows exceptional abilities in some ways. Look, the reality is that Sam, most recommendations are solid. You want a recommendation to jump off a page, and it doesn't have to say that OP is the best consultant that recommender has seen in their career. It can be OP excels in these three areas, and these three areas can be unique qualities that are demonstrated whether through consulting work or OP's work and volunteer, part of ERG initiatives and so forth. The reality is find a way to find a way to stand out.
Yeah. So the question here that people are asking is, okay, but the recommender's writing it. How do I have any say on this? Well, so for context, most MBA applicants, and certainly the clients we work with, we encourage to guide their recommender in a certain direction, right?
Mhm.
So for example, the strengths question. Give them two or three strengths that you think align with your application essays. Just hand them the strengths. Say, look, these are a couple of strengths that I think maybe have come up in my performance evaluations that I think align with my strengths. And by the way, here's an example for each of those. Now, you've given the recommender two strengths with specific examples. Now, unless they really are out there to sabotage your application, like you've given them everything they need to write a really strong LOR. That's all that's needed. That's how to do it. If you just give them it and say, hey, over to you, hot potato here, you take it,
Mhm.
God knows what happens. And applicants that are otherwise strong do end up underperforming because of that relatively weak LOR. So manage your recommenders. Everybody does it. You're expected to do it. If you have a close relationship with your recommender, of course you manage them by helping them, by giving them some strengths, by giving them some material to work with. Dig out your old performance report from last year, have a look at it, and just say to the recommender, by the way, in last performance report, you told me these were my two strengths, and this was the area of constructive feedback that you gave me. Off you go.
Yeah.
Right? There's no reason for the recommendation to not be standout if you really put some work into it. Okay, John, other schools that should be considered. I'm gonna jump in just with a bit of a curveball here. This is a bit of a sort of Yeah, a bit out there. But the school that jumped out to me was INSEAD.
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
was the one that I was immediately like, what? Of course. Now, obviously, OP, or clearly, OP is targeting US schools only at the moment. But just to throw it out there, right? INSEAD, massive consulting focus. They love MBB applicants. They require two languages at least, which you specifically told us that you have, English and
Hmm.
Southeast Asian language.
Hmm.
They're strong on the impact side and sustainability and impact goals, and they have the Singapore campus, so you
Hmm.
could already start building your exposure in
Yeah.
that region from a professional perspective. Look, I know it's a curveball. I know you focused on US schools, but that's the one that jumped to my mind. John, any other ideas?
Not a curveball at all. I think that's right up. I think that would play really nicely into OP's category, into OP's metrics. I would say Yale would be a really good one. OP did list it as a safety. I don't think it's a safety.
Yeah,
And here's the thing. I think
high for safety, right?
Yale SOM is very stats focused as well. And Yale SOM likes folks with really high GRE scores. I think OP's story, particularly around sustainability, ESG type net that type of narrative is something Yale would love. But OP should apply, but not a safety.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. For me, this is screaming a and kind of answering question one. This is screaming a T10, maybe lower end of the M7 profile.
Hmm.
And if scholarships are important, actually scholarships aren't because OP is sponsored, so we can forget about that. But I would say, the safety is kind of the next level down, the T10, T15 level. Cornell, Ross, Darden, those are for me the safe schools. I think you're right that Yale is a bit
Hmm.
more in that target range than it is safety. Okay, good. John, let's move on to the next profile. Profile four is asking for a vibe check. So we're going to give them one. 3.8 GPA, 327, 26-year-old female, LGBT, big four tech consulting. I think that basically covers it. Aiming for 26. Okay, senior data and analytics consultant in a big four. Location south. I think we can assume south of the US. BS Info Systems stats minor from a top five public undergrad program with a 3.8 GPA, 327 GRE, 4.5 years of work experience on application, 26-year-old Asian American LGBT, and we know female as well from the, oh yeah, F. Okay, work experience. Pretty standard data and analytics consulting experience. Had one promotion. Engagements have spanned everything from data, or all the way through the data and analytics spectrum, from master data management implementation to data visualization, blah, blah, blah. Leadership experience includes leading two work streams. That's nice. Overseeing a team of offshore resources and yeah, 30 plus leading a project with 30 plus resources. Okay, extracurriculars. Undergrad. Senior photojournalist for 3 years for a large news publication. That's really exciting. Pro bono digital consulting transformation services during state congressional caucus. Interesting as well. Post undergrad team lead for 4 years for a local LGBT non-profit. Wow. Overseeing one of the largest pride events in the South. Serving as point of contact for 200 vendors and a team of 6 people. Recipient of the Volunteer of the Year award. That's solid, isn't it? Why MBA? I want to pivot to a leadership role where I'm owning something after providing strategic direction. So moving from an advisory role to an ownership role. Okay. 4 years, ready to use what I've learned to drive long-term value, blah, blah, blah. Some consulting speak there. Want to transition away from consulting and broaden my network. And then saying goals tech PM or PMM. Interesting. Okay, well, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on those goals, John, later. Schools, Reach, Booth, Yale, NYU, Stern, Target, Fuqua, Ross. Thoughts about Reach schools? Unsure whether SOM or Stern, given their heavy emphasis on stats, as you were saying, John, and the GRE is not spectacular. Any other schools I should be considering? Bonus if I can get some scholarship money. Okay, John, how do you see this profile?
I have seen similar pro. many similar profiles to this, and I've worked with a handful of folks with similar profiles to OP, short of the the wonderful extracurricular experience, and I mean that in a good way. Really clear playbook for success. And I don't mean this, I don't say this often, but I think OP is sandbagging herself a little bit. I think those schools can be a little bit aim a little higher. But let me dive in. Academically solid, a 3.8 from a reputable public university undergrad with a technical major. A 327 is decent. Obviously, if OP thinks that she can get, into the upper 320s or lower 330s, always consider that. But that's a good baseline for many of those schools that she's applying to. Professionally, one promo from Big Four Consulting. The leadership work experience seems pretty solid. I've seen instances of former clients who have achieved similar types of leadership projects as OP had done, and that's well worth talking about in the resume and other parts of their application. Love the extracurriculars. Senior photojournalist from the largest news publication. It's probably
Hmm.
Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. Leading organization efforts for Pride Festival through her LGBT organization, also a big plus. I like what I'm seeing, Sam. Maybe I'm enamored by this whole, by the nuanced extracurriculars, but over to you.
Yeah, I really love that. So explain to us why you're so enamored by those extracurriculars. How do you see those? Put us in the mindset of the school. When they see this, what are they thinking?
Photojournalist is about storytelling through a unique visual medium, right? Being able to be recognized for your craft, right? Being a photojournalist for your school newspaper is one thing. Being a photojournalist for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times is another thing entirely. I can just see AdCom, like they're gagging at, well, what if OP could help us with our recruiting efforts, or
Yeah.
that's gonna, yeah, or OP's connection to these organizations. There's so many ways to go off of this, and it's not immediately, the ROI doesn't seem super business oriented, but I think schools will find this remarkable in some way.
Yeah, I'm already thinking ahead about. So one of the target schools on the reach side was Booth, and Booth question two in the essays is like, we know about you from a professional side in essay one. So tell us about something outside of the office. Tell us about something about yourself. I'm imagining a story about how OP got into photography,
Mm,
some of the cool stories OP has been involved in, with some nice numbers, readership stats there as well.
yeah.
What the takeaways have been, how that's relevant to an MBA, how OP is going to contribute to the class. There's a great booth essay too there, isn't there?
Yeah, and not to mention the 6 image essay from NYU Stern is going to be
Yeah,
absolutely
seriously.
on fire.
Seriously, for OP, for those watching that don't know what we're talking about here, NYU Stern ask for applicants to submit 6 photos. It's called their Pick Six, and it's quite, people often struggle with this. I think, as far as I know, they're the only school that ask for photos in this way, and people often struggle. OP as a photographer, it's just, you're gonna love it. You're gonna absolutely nail it. So I would include. Oh yeah, OP is including NYU Stern. I wonder if that's why. Might be linked to it. That's gonna be brilliant for you. Okay, let's talk about this from a diversity perspective, John. How do you see a 26-year-old female, Asian American, LGBT? Schools
Hmm.
like that, right?
Yep. I would say Asian American generally is slightly overrepresented, but then you have, female LGBT, I think, um, definitely helps create a little bit more nuance here in the application, especially if the LGBT angle is rooted in the story. And it sounds like it is, just given OP's experience being so involved in the nonprofit.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what's interesting about sort of these diversity angles like LGBT, like first generation, etc., is on their own, they're like, yeah, they are. But when get really interesting and really valuable for MBA applications is when they make a nice story, right?
Yeah.
If you can tell the story of, so for example, Kellogg, I think it's essay two is the leadership story where they ask about like, they tell you they ask you to tell a leadership story. This could be a great Kellogg essay too,
Yeah.
We could tell the story of leading the team,
Yeah.
one of the challenges you faced perhaps during this Pride event.
Mhm.
200,000 visitors. That's going to throw up some challenges, probably some
Yeah.
interesting lessons. And it's these lessons that meet and allow you to sort of leverage, so to speak, that diversity status.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit transactional, but you know what I mean. It's
Yeah.
that's why LGBT is interesting, because you put yourself in a position where you're managing a pride march.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really, really cool. Okay,
Yeah.
John, what about goals? What about goals? So OP has been doing data consulting basically, and now wants to have some ownership. If you were
Mhm.
thinking about the career goals essay, what's a classic post MBA goal, immediate post MBA goal that fits OP's needs, that is going to be, providing strategic direction and ownership rather than advisory?
Well, I mean, one classic area is corporate strategy for a client side company, which ideally OP has had exposure to during their time working for the consultancy.
Hmm.
I did see you bristle a little bit at Tech PMM. I did see that or Tech PM, and I do see why. But I think there's enough. I think if OP were able to, um, uh, you know, leverage, talk a little bit more about the work that she did, the technical work that she did, with at her Big Four consultancy and the leadership work that she's done. I think, Tech PM and Tech PMM and PMM could be plausible. Could be plausible.
Interesting. Yeah, like on the one hand, the corporate strategy route, the which is sort of what jumps to mind when we talk about strategic direction. We're talking about things like M&A opportunities, right? Going out to the market and thinking, who should we buy? Who should we merge with? Whatever. So that's sort of one thing that's involved. Also, just understanding the big picture trends that the company's been affected by, demographic issues, that sort of stuff. This sort of high level strategic direction that would be done in a corporate strategy role.
Yep.
PM and PMM is much more sort of in the weeds. It might suit the tech background more, to be
Hmm.
than the than a corporate strategy role. But then again, armed with an MBA, you could argue that you've got the tech background and the strategy classes, etc., and
Hmm.
a corporate strategist role could work. Interesting. I think there's a bit of work to be done there. I don't think either of them is right or wrong, but definitely something
Sure.
not to leave to chance. Make sure what you choose fits with your story.
Agreed.
Good. Okay. I think we've covered everything here. I would also, yeah, okay. There's this question about here. Any other schools? I want to keep my list relatively small and realistic. Why? Why? We're in June. You've got 3 months. You can obviously put the work in. I think OP should be applying for, yeah, like we said before, 6, 7 schools.
Hmm.
Yeah, and target scholarships as well.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I think OP, I really like this profile. I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball in here. I'm going to say OP is probably not reaching high enough.
that's what I thought too.
Right? So actually what we're saying here is Booth, Yale, and NYU, those are actually your target, your mid. Your Fuqua and Ross are like your kind of safety. And I think throw in Harvard, Stanford, Wharton application in there. You
Yep.
regret it if you don't.
Mhm.
Right? Why do I say that? Strong extracurriculars, GRE in line with the HSW average, GPA a little bit above the average. You've got diversity points going in your favor. Look, there's no guarantees that you're going to get admitted to a Harvard, Stanford, Wharton ever, but you're in with a fair crack. I think you should be doing that. OP, you asked for a vibe check. Vibe check passed.
Check passed.
Right. John, next profile. Oof. Interesting one, this one. I think we're going the opposite direction a little bit, but maybe. Maybe. Okay. Background of this applicant looking for a profile evaluation. Undergrad from a historically black college university, international relations, below median GPA. Executive assessment, EA score of 170. That's a very strong EA score. about 6 years of work experience by matriculation, and a bunch of work experience in sort of political areas. So political internships in college, Congress, presidential campaign, etc. Public policy, the social media company, research at the university, government contracting, marketing, consumer electronics, marketing at FANG. Recently went independent as a marketing consultant after I got laid off. Right. So to be clear, you're not unemployed, you're a self-employed marketing consultant. Key difference there. Volunteer service, summer program coordinator for STEM programming for high school students. CBS's top choice, also applying to Stern, McCombs, Georgetown, UCLA, etc. HBS just to see what happens. Okay. Post MBA goals, break into investment banking or private equity. What? Also would do MBB consulting as a backup. As a backup, yeah? McKinsey as a backup. Want to eventually pursue entrepreneurship, but want valuation transaction experience. I know it's a massive pivot since I have zero finance background. Never worked in banking, didn't study finance in school, and he's hoping that the MBA is going to fill all of that finance background. Okay, question one, is this career path realistic? Question two, anyone else pivots from completely unrelated fields into finance? I know my stats aren't M7 typical, but the story is differentiated. Give me some feedback. Okay, John, a lot to get into there. How do you see the profile?
Firstly, before I dive into it, I think HBS, just to see what happens, should be the name of a t-shirt. That's,
Yes.
that's a great one. That's a great one.
Imagine that with at Harvard, and then you have underneath, I was just seeing what would happen.
And
Nice.
look, I think OP's profile has a few misguided expectations, I would say, which we'll dive into some redeeming factors. Academically, there's not much to go off on here. Below median GPA could mean many things depending on the school, whether you apply to Georgetown McDonough or to M7 school.
Yep.
But I do like the 170 EA. With that, very few. I don't know if many of those schools that accept the EA. I don't know of many B schools that accept the EA. At the traditional MBA level. So I would think about retaking either a GRE or a GMAT there. Professionally, I see quite a few jumps. Looks like OP does clarify what some of those are. I see 6-month fellowships and so forth. Going from government contracting to marketing insights. Little bit hard to connect the dots here. I don't know what the narrative is. I don't know how that feeds into the goal, that investment banking goal or the consulting goal, which you can talk about later, Sam. Extracurriculars are a little average to me. Summer program coordinator and voter assistant specialist, that's fine. Beyond just the lack of, information about the academics and the jumps in the professional profile, Sam, I don't know what to make of this. I really don't.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dive in. Let's help how we can. So EA of 170. So for those watching, I'm pretty sure that's a maximum for the EA, right? EA maximum score. I think it's out of 170. No, 174 apparently is the highest. So it's a very, very high EA score, but not all schools accept the EA. So we know, as we talked about earlier in today's session, EMBA programs accept the EA. Some MBA programs do as well, but not all. Now, we have a blog post on samweeks.com, and we'll post this down in the comments. The schools that accept the EA, there's a bunch of them. These are the sort of the key ones. OP is right, on the list. Columbia was on the list, Darden was on the list, Duke was on the list, NYU was on the list. UCLA was on the list. So I think OP has quite strategically chosen the schools that take the EA, but not HBS. As far as I know, HBS do not accept the executive assessment. So just to see what happens isn't going to work, I'm afraid. You either need to take the GRE or the GMAT or forget about HBS. But otherwise, a target list of schools based on the very strong EA score, that's a fair and pragmatic approach. I don't mind that. Um, what about these goals, John? I mean, this is what it comes back to, and it's question one. It's investment banking, private equity, or MBB as a backup.
Again, would do MBB because something that's a backup should be the name of a t-shirt as well. This is a little bit far-fetched, Sam. A little bit far-fetched.
Well, let me put some context onto this, right? So my roommate at Oxford broke into MBB, right? Broke into McKinsey. Achieve the dream that so many business school applicants are aiming for. Now, she had to make some whopping sacrifices to make that, right? She missed social events because she was doing case practice. She went traveling to do the interviews. She was out missing classes. She was living and breathing MBB consulting for about 6 months. Would have given her little finger to get just through to the interviews. She was dedicated, and she got there, and she crushed it when she was there. But it was not a backup for her, right? If you think you're going to break into MBB just as I might try an MBB, you're high. It's not going to happen.
Mhm.
Got to be absolutely dedicated. And by the way, it's the same for investment banking as well. Schools very, very early in the process of the MBA are going to make you choose which track are you going to go down. Are you going to go down the IB recruiting track? Are you going to go down the MBB recruiting track? And by the way, you can't do both.
Mhm.
So these, what my point is that these are really serious, and you're not going to be able to, one or the other. You're not going to be able to wing it. And then, as somebody who was in IB, this is I went through the Merrill Lynch training program. I went through the SocGen training program, both from an internship perspective and a graduate perspective. And everybody I was working with had some degree of finance background. Now, not like, doesn't have to be hardcore, but you got to have some. You got to have some. And an MBA on its own is not enough. You're going to have other things that are training you, that are positioning you for that finance break. What do I mean by this? Right, what do I mean by this? John, I did a little bit of homework. This is something that a client that I worked with previously had done, aiming to make the same goal, pivoting into finance from a completely different sector. It's called the Corporate Finance Institute, and they do a thing called the FVMA, which is the Financial Modeling and Valuation Analyst. It's a really good starter. It gives you a qualification. It gives you a certification that says, I'm studying in finance. I'm really dedicating myself to this. I'm going to break into the finance sector, and I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and I'm showing some focus. And it's a signpost, and it can go on your resume. It can go in your optional essays. It can go in the portal. It can go in a whole bunch of places. If you're going to break into finance and you're going to take it seriously, this is the kind of thing that is needed. Um, Bit of a rant there, John. What am I missing?
No, I think you hit it right on the head there. Um, what I'm hearing is that applying to these programs, it is not just let me submit my application and see what happens. It's a whole process, and I've seen firsthand the same thing that your roommate went through, Sam. Applying to consulting recruiting and investment banking recruiting, especially if you don't have prior experience in that sector. You need to put in the time. That time takes ready sacrifices.
So, summary of this profile is MBA, definitely credible profile for an MBA that accepts the EA, right? We've shown you the list. The narrative, the goals need to be something that aligns with this policy work and this politics work that you've been doing, policy consulting, etc. There's heaps of firms doing that, and that would make sense. Once you're on the MBA, if you want to recruit for finance, show them you mean it, and you might be able to. But for applying, I would say there's probably better goals that make sense. Um, that's, I think, the crux of it. Now, John, watching the clock, I want to quickly talk to you about our bonus question.
Sure.
This question went viral this week, and it's really interesting. I'm not going to read through the whole post because it's really long, but it's basically saying this guy or guy girl graduated from HBS pivoted out of consulting, landed a PM internship, and got a return offer. Worked as a PM in tech for a few years. And now get this, my boss only has a bachelor's from San Jose State. My teammate only did UC Davis undergrad. In other words, many of his colleagues don't have a super pedigree professional background. Now, people are laughing. They're saying you went to Harvard and we ended up in the same job. And basically, OP is saying, I don't regret HBS. It got me the pivot, but 6 years out, the prestige is wearing off. John, what do you think?
Look, I think there are there are nuances to everything, and in classic MBA fashion, I would say it depends. But I say that an MBA degree is with you for life, and oftentimes I see that there are peaks and valleys where that prestige pays off. I think much of the allure of the HBS degree helps you get your next job. It will also help you 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line. That prestige stays with you. It in some ways is tied to your professional background, and it adds validity to what you do. That doesn't mean that you need an HBS degree to be successful at your job. It's clear that there are, OP's boss went to a non-target university, and so did, his teammate. But I think I think I don't think OP is thinking about this necessarily in the right way. It's not that you cannot get to where you are without an MBA, without a Harvard MBA. It's that you can in other ways. It just comes down to the intangibles, and the intangibles is what a great MBA degree will help provide down the line. You just don't know it yet.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if this might have been a troll post at the start, the way it's sort of the tone of it, but we're going to assuming it is real. My thought on this is one, OP has gone into one of the an industry or a role where you do not need an MBA. You can do
Mhm.
a PM without one. Most PMs don't have an MBA, so that can be done. So of course, people around him, a lot of them don't have an MBA, and a lot of them don't even have sort of target schools on their resume. That's sort of to be expected. I think that the value of the MBA will come into the next move up. So if OP from here moves up from a product management role into a more senior, sort of a more strategic role higher up in the tech company, that is definitely going to value the MBA. And if OP puts himself forward for that, then the question, the recruiter or the manager, the person who is deciding that promotion is going to look at the MBA, and the person with San Jose State undergrad is not going to be able to make that move upwards. So I think there's that angle. And I also think that what hasn't come up here at all is the network. You and I have talked, John, a lot about how the network is one of the key value propositions or valuable aspects of the MBA. And OP has been in the same company the whole time. It doesn't sound like has really leveraged the HBS network at all. So that doesn't mean the HBS network isn't valuable. That just means OP hasn't leveraged it. So that's the other thing that I'm seeing.
Mhm.
But don't not apply to HBS because this person hasn't seen value. I think that's probably the key message.
I have light.
Awesome. All right, John, thank you very, very much for joining me today. I know you've got to run. I know you've got some interesting ship activities. I hope you've got some swimming trunks. I will see you very soon for another roast.
Bye, Sam. Happy Friday.
See ya.